Youngest daughter called me at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. She's an ER nurse in Baltimore, works nights, so a call at that hour wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the first thing she said. "Dad, don't react, just listen. Is Roger home right now?" Roger, my son-in-law, my older daughter's husband, the man who had been living in my house for 11 months. "He's asleep upstairs," I said. "Why? Are you sure?" I listened. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that is weight to it when you're 68 and alone most of the time. "I think so. What's going on, sweetheart?" "Dad." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "I need you to go to the basement, right now. Don't turn on any lights. Don't say anything to anyone. Just go downstairs and call me back." I've known my daughter for 31 years. I know when she's being dramatic and I know when she's scared. This was scared. I went downstairs in the dark. It had started the way these things usually do, gradually, with something that looked like kindness. My older daughter Renee had called me the previous October. She and Roger had hit a rough patch financially. Roger's landscaping business had taken losses 2 seasons in a row, a bad winter followed by a drought. They were behind on rent. Could they stay with me for a few months while they got back on their feet? I live in a 4-bedroom colonial outside of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. My wife passed 8 years ago. The house has been mostly quiet since my younger daughter moved to Baltimore for nursing school and never came back. I told Renee, of course, family is family. They moved in November with 2 SUVs packed full, their 2 dogs, and more confidence than the situation seemed to call for. Roger shook my hand at the front door like he owned the place and said, "We really appreciate this, sir." He called me sir the way some people say it, not out of respect, but to put distance between themselves and accountability. I didn't register it then. I registered it later. The first months were fine, or fine enough. Renee cooked sometimes. Roger shoveled the driveway without being asked. We had dinners together. It felt like family. I told myself this was good, having people in the house again. Less rattling around in the rooms. Then, in late January, Roger started asking questions about my finances. Not blunt questions. Never blunt. He was too careful for that. He'd come into the living room where I was watching the evening news and say things like, "I was reading that a lot of retirees are moving their savings into annuities. You ever look into that?" Or, "You know what I was thinking? With a house this size, you must be paying a fortune in property tax. Have you ever thought about downsizing?" I told him I was fine. I'd worked 34 years as a civil engineer, managed infrastructure projects for the county, had my pension, my savings, my late wife's life insurance. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. I didn't need financial advice from a man who was living in my spare bedroom because he couldn't afford his own rent. I said none of that out loud. I just said I was fine. He kept asking, different angles, same destination. By February, Renee had started joining the conversations. She had a softer touch than Roger. She'd sit next to me on the couch and say, "Dad, I just worry about you. What if something happened and you needed help? Have you thought about updating your power of attorney?" I told her my attorney had handled all of that. She said, "But what if you needed someone to manage things day to day, someone close to you?" I didn't like the way that sounded. But she was my daughter. I told myself I was being paranoid. I called my younger daughter that weekend. She's the one I talk to most, always has been. Even as kids, she was the one who wanted to understand things, ask questions, sit up late and talk. Renee was always more like her mother. Practical, efficient, less interested in conversation than in results. I told her about the financial questions. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Dad, has Roger tried to get you to sign anything?" "No," I said. "Why?" "Just keep me posted," she said, "and don't sign anything without calling me first." I thought she was overreacting. She thought I wasn't reacting enough. We were both partially right. In March, Roger brought home a man named Clifford who he introduced as a financial planner. Clifford wore a suit that cost more than Roger's landscaping equipment. He had a portfolio and a smile and a voice like a radio announcer. He sat at my dining room table, my table in my house, and spread out documents. "We've been looking at some options for you," Clifford said, "particularly around asset protection, given your age and the size of your estate." "Given my age?" I repeated. "Well, yes. I mean, the goal would be to make sure everything is structured optimally, so there's no disruption in management if your health ever became a concern. Renee put her hand on mine. We just want to make sure you're protected, Dad. I asked Clifford who had hired him. He looked at Roger. Roger said he'd arranged the consultation as a favor, no charge. I told him I appreciated the thought, but I had my own attorney and my own accountant, and I wasn't interested in restructuring anything. Clifford nodded, gathered his papers, and left. Roger thanked him at the door in a low voice. I couldn't hear what they said, but Roger patted him on the shoulder in a way that didn't look like a first meeting. That night I called my attorney, Margaret Chen, who had handled my estate planning since my wife died. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Don't let anyone pressure you into signing anything, and let me know if it happens again." I said, "Is this something people do?" She said, "More than you'd like to know." After I hung up, I sat in my workshop. I've had a woodworking shop in the basement since my late 40s. It's where I go to think. I build things, birdhouses, furniture, small cabinets. It's meditative the same way some people find gardening meditative. You have to be present. The wood tells you what it needs if you pay attention. I sat in the basement and thought about what the wood was telling me. It was telling me to pay attention. The cameras went up in April. Roger said it was for security. He'd ordered a system online, 4 exterior cameras, 2 interior. He installed them himself one Saturday while I was at the hardware store. When I came home, there were cameras in the kitchen, the hallway outside my bedroom, the living room, and the front porch. I told him to take the interior ones down. He said, "Sir, I just want to make sure you're safe. You're alone when we're not here." "I've been alone in this house for 8 years. I said, "Take them down." He took the kitchen one down. He said the hallway one was for security purposes. He left it. I noticed other things after that. My mail started disappearing. Not all of it, just selectively. A letter from my bank arrived opened and retaped. When my neighbor, a retired school teacher named Beverly, who has lived 2 houses down for 20 years, stopped by for coffee, Roger appeared in the kitchen within 10 minutes with some tasks that required conversation, and Beverly left early. The next time she came, Roger was home again. Same thing. I mentioned Beverly's visits to Renee. She said, "I just think you should be careful, Dad. You know how people take advantage of older folks, especially women who come around alone." Beverly has been my neighbor since my wife was alive. She drove me to chemotherapy appointments when Eleanor was sick. I didn't say any of that. I just looked at my daughter and tried to find the girl I'd raised. I started keeping notes. Small things, dates and observations in a notebook I kept in my workshop under the workbench. My younger daughter called more often. I told her about the cameras, the opened mail, Beverly. She stopped sounding worried. She started sounding something else. Focused. She said, "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Have either of them made comments about the house? About what happens to it when you're gone? I thought back. I hadn't registered it as significant at the time. But Roger had made a comment in February, offhand after dinner, about whether I'd ever considered a living trust, whether the property would go through probate or transfer directly. "Yes," I said, "once." She was quiet. Then, "Okay, Dad, I love you. Please don't sign anything." The conversation that changed everything happened in May. I came home early from a doctor's appointment, routine checkup, nothing wrong with me, and let myself in through the side door, which opens directly into the hallway near the kitchen. The dogs had heard my car and were barking, which covered the sound of me coming in. Roger and Renee were in the kitchen. They didn't know I was there. I heard Roger say, "He's not going to do it voluntarily, you know that." Renee said something I couldn't make out. Roger said, "We don't need him to be enthusiastic. We just need him to sign. Once he signs the POA over to you, the rest is straightforward. We start with the accounts, then the property. The attorney says we can structure the sale as an estate management decision. Keep it clean." I stood in the hallway. The dogs were still barking. I couldn't move. Renee said, "What if he calls Margaret?" "We handle that when it comes to it." Roger, "It's not stealing, Renee. He's going to leave it to someone anyway. We're just making sure it goes to the right people." I walked backward to the side door, quietly, let myself back out. Sat in my car for 20 minutes. Then I drove to my attorney's office without calling ahead. Margaret Chen listened to everything I said without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands on her desk and said, "I'm glad you came to me directly. Here's what I want you to do. Nothing. Go home. Act normal. And let's talk about documentation." I said, "What kind of documentation?" She said, "The kind that holds up in court." Margaret contacted a private investigator she trusted, a woman named Dana, who had 30 years of experience in financial elder abuse cases. Dana explained the situation simply. She said, "They're planning to use a durable power of attorney to take control of your assets. Once that's in place, they can liquidate accounts, transfer property, and there's very little you can do to stop it. The goal is to get you to sign before you realize what you're signing." She said it happened in Pennsylvania every year, more than most people knew. She said elderly homeowners were targeted the same way. Family members who moved in, isolated, slowly maneuvered a parent into signing over control. "Your advantage," Dana said, "is that you know it's coming, and you haven't signed anything yet." She told me what I needed to do. She arranged for a small audio device, discreet, legally usable in Pennsylvania, which is a one-party consent state, to be kept in my workshop and in the kitchen. I was the one party. Everything I recorded, I was entitled to record. I went home that night and made dinner. Roger and Renee sat across from me. I passed the rolls. I asked Roger how the business was going. He said it was picking up. I said good. The whole time I was watching him the way I watch wood for defects, looking for the grain beneath the surface. I called my younger daughter after they went to bed. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Dad, I have a friend who does forensic accounting. Can I ask her to look at some things?" "What things?" "Is Roger's business registered in Pennsylvania? Does it have any actual clients, any tax filings?" I hadn't thought to check. I said yes. 3 days later she called back, "Dad, the landscaping business has no registered employees, no state business license in good standing, and the last tax filing was 2 years ago. There's a lien from the IRS." She paused. "Roger's not bad at business. He doesn't have a business. Not really." That made the durable power of attorney more urgent to understand. He wasn't trying to supplement income. He was trying to replace it. June passed slowly. I kept notes. The recording device captured 3 conversations I brought to Margaret, each one more explicit than the last. Roger discussing property values and how quickly the house could sell. Renee on the phone with someone I didn't know who, talking about her father's decline, saying he was confused more than he used to be, that he needed more support. I wasn't confused. I was retired. There's a difference. The harder part was Renee. I want to be honest about that because it would be easy to tell this as a story where she was simply a villain. She wasn't. She was my daughter who had made terrible decisions with a man who had a gift for making terrible decisions sound reasonable. I could hear it in the recordings. The way Roger framed things, the language he used, the way he made greed sound like concern. I recognized it because I'd watched him use the same techniques on me. Did she know what she was doing was wrong? Yes, but I think she talked herself into believing it wasn't. That's different from knowing and not caring. It doesn't make it better, but it's different. My younger daughter flew up from Baltimore in late June. She didn't tell Renee she was coming. She came to see me, and we sat in the basement workshop for 2 hours with Margaret on speakerphone going over everything. At the end of the call, Margaret said, "I think we have enough." My daughter held my hand. She said, "You okay, Dad?" "I've been better," I said. "I've also been worse." The night my younger daughter called at 2 in the morning, the call that started all of this, happened 3 weeks after that meeting in my basement. I went downstairs in the dark. I sat at my workbench and called her back. She said, "I'm sorry. I had to wait until I was on break. Dad, I need to tell you something and I need you to stay calm." I'm calm. Roger's IRS situation is bigger than we knew. My friend kept digging. He has judgments against him in 2 states, Pennsylvania and Ohio. Fraudulent contractor schemes, homeowners who paid for work that was never done. He used a different business name each time. The LLC he had in Ohio was dissolved after a civil judgment. I said, "How long ago?" 5 years, 6 years. He's been doing this. Dad, this isn't his first time in someone's house. I sat in the dark with that. She said, I called Margaret. She says it's time. She's talking to the DA's investigator tomorrow morning. But Dad, tonight, are there any documents in the house? Anything with your signature on it? Anything they could have access to? My files were in a locked cabinet in my bedroom. My will, my existing power of attorney naming my younger daughter and Margaret as co-agents, my account information. I'd moved everything there in April, quietly. Changed my bank account passwords, set up two-factor authentication on my financial accounts after reading an article about elder financial fraud. They don't have access to anything, I said. Good, she exhaled. Tomorrow Margaret files the civil complaint. The DA's investigator interviews you. It's going to move fast after that. What about tonight? Just don't let him know anything's different. Can you do that? I've been doing that for 8 months. Yes, I said. I sat in my workshop for another hour after we hung up, ran my hand along the surface of the cabinet I'd been building, a small one, cherry wood, with dovetail joints. My wife had wanted one for the bedroom. I'd been building it slowly, no rush. It was almost done. Some things take the time they take. The investigator from the Lancaster County DA's office came to my home the following Thursday, along with a woman from the State Attorney General's Financial Crimes Unit. They came when Roger was out. I'd timed it. Renee was home. I let her know they were coming about 30 seconds before they arrived. The look on her face when she opened the door is something I won't describe. I saw it and I looked away. The interviews lasted 2 hours. I gave them the recordings, the notebook, a written timeline Margaret had helped me prepare. The investigator was a calm, methodical man who asked clear questions and wrote everything down. He thanked me for the documentation. After they left, Renee sat in the living room without speaking. The dogs were in her lap. She looked like she'd been awake for days. I sat down across from her. I said, "Did you know about Ohio?" She looked at her hands. I knew there were problems. He said they were settled. They weren't. I know that now. Did you know he'd done this before, to other people? She started crying. Not performance crying, the kind that makes you ugly, that you can't control. He said it was different. He said we needed help and you had more than enough, and it wasn't really hurting you. It was hurting me, I said. You just decided I wasn't the one you cared about. She sobbed harder. I sat there and let the words stay in the room. After a while, she said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." "I know you are," I said. "That doesn't fix it." Roger was interviewed 2 days later. He had a lawyer within the hour. Within the week, the civil complaint had been filed and criminal referrals were moving to the system. The AG's Financial Crimes Unit identified a third victim in Delaware, an elderly woman who had lost $47,000 in a contractor scheme using one of Roger's dissolved LLCs. Renee filed for legal separation in August. The civil case resolved in October. The court found Roger liable for attempted financial exploitation and conspiracy to commit fraud. He was ordered to pay $85,000 in damages to me and contribute to a restitution fund for the Delaware victim. His attorney tried to negotiate. Margaret shut that down the same way she shut down everything that wasted her time, cleanly, without discussion. I gave Roger 30 days to remove his belongings. He was out in 3 weeks. Renee stayed with a friend from her church. She called me twice before I answered. When I did, she said, "I know you don't owe me anything. I just need you to know I'm getting help." I said, "I'm glad." She said, "I don't expect to be forgiven." I thought about what to say to that for a long moment. "You were my daughter before you were his wife," I said finally. "That doesn't disappear. But right now I can't tell you when or whether it gets better between us. I don't know yet." She said she understood. I believed her. By November, the house was mine again in every sense. Quiet, but a different kind of quiet than before. Not empty, just still. Beverly came for coffee and stayed 3 hours. We talked about her grandchildren in my workshop and a novel she'd been reading. It felt like breathing after holding your breath. My younger daughter flew up for Thanksgiving. Just the two of us, my kitchen, her mother's recipe for sweet potato pie that she'd learned by watching and never measured anything. We ate too much. We talked until midnight. She said, "How are you actually doing, Dad?" not the version for other people. I thought about it. Some days are fine, I said. Some days I look at Renee's old room and I can't decide what I feel. She's still my kid. I don't know how to stop that. You don't have to. I know. It's just hard to hold both things at once. That she did what she did and that I still love her. My daughter nodded. She'd heard me. She didn't try to fix it. That's the thing about the people worth keeping. They don't try to fix what isn't theirs to fix. In December, I finished the cherrywood cabinet, set it in the bedroom where my wife had always wanted one, in the corner by the window. It fits exactly right. I stood there and looked at it for a long time. 34 years of engineering work. I helped build infrastructure that still carries people across rivers and through floodplains. I know how to construct things that last. I know how to read the land and account for pressure and failure points in the weight of what you're building. What I didn't know, what nobody tells you, is that the thing most likely to threaten the structure you built isn't weather or time. It's the people you let inside it. I know that now. I learned it the hard way, at 68, in my own house, sitting in the dark in my basement while my son-in-law talked about selling everything I had over the sound of the dogs barking. But I also know this, I paid attention. I stayed quiet when quiet was needed. I kept records. I called the right people. I didn't let being loved by someone make me pretend I wasn't being wronged by them. The cabinet stands in the corner of the bedroom. Every morning I see it and think of Eleanor, and I think of the year I almost lost the house she and I picked out together, and I think of my younger daughter calling at 2 in the morning, scared and precise and exactly the right person. I think of the wood waiting for you to be present enough to hear what it needs. Some things are worth the patience. Some things are worth protecting. And some threats don't come from outside at all. They walk in the front door carrying luggage, shaking your hand, calling you sir. Pay attention. That's all it takes. Just pay attention. I keep coming back to the moment I stood in my own hallway, unable to move, listening to Roger explain how to take everything I had. The dogs were barking. The house smelled like the pot roast Renee had made the night before, and my son-in-law was calmly describing the best way to strip a 68-year-old man of his home, his savings, and whatever was left of his dignity. What I've learned, and I mean really learned, the kind that settles into your bones, is that consequences don't announce themselves. They accumulate quietly, the way water finds cracks in a foundation. Roger made choices. Renee made choices. Every small decision they made, every rationalizing conversation, every document they tried to maneuver me towards signing, those weren't isolated moments. They were bricks in a wall that eventually came down on them. That's not fate. That's not luck. That's just the plain arithmetic of how actions add up over time. I think about my own choices too. The choice to pay attention when something felt wrong instead of explaining it away. The choice to call Margaret without waiting to be certain. The choice to sit across from Roger at dinner and pass the rolls and say nothing while quietly building a record that would hold up in court. There were nights I second-guessed myself. Nights I thought maybe I was being a paranoid old man who'd gotten too suspicious of his own family. But I kept coming back to what I knew. Something was wrong, and pretending it wasn't wouldn't make it less so. That's the thing about clear thinking. It's not traumatic. It doesn't feel like a revelation. It feels like stubbornness. It feels like writing one more thing in a notebook under a workbench at 11 o'clock at night when you'd rather be in bed. It's small and unglamorous, and it's the only thing that actually works. And then there's Renee. That part doesn't resolve cleanly, and I won't pretend it does. She was my daughter before she was his wife, and she will be my daughter long after the court documents are filed and the judgment is paid. What she did was wrong. She knew it was wrong and did it anyway, which is its own kind of wound. But I've watched enough structures fail over a career to know that things don't collapse all at once. They lean for a long time first. Someone has to decide whether to shore them up or walk away before they fall. I'm not ready to walk away, but I'm also not willing to pretend the leaning didn't happen. What I want, if I'm being honest, is for her to become someone who wouldn't make those choices again. Not for my sake, for hers. Because a person who lets someone like Roger narrate their life for them will always end up somewhere they didn't mean to go. That takes a kind of courage that has nothing to do with grand gestures. It's the courage to sit with discomfort and not reach for the easiest exit. It's hard, quiet work, and nobody gives you credit for it while you're doing it. I finished Eleanor's cabinet in December. Cherry wood, dovetail joints, exactly where she always wanted it. I built it slowly, over the course of a year that tried its best to break me. It didn't. I'm still here. The cabinet is still here. That's enough. Some days that's everything.